Deathworlders struck without mercy after receiving an alien SOS. Ethan Moore sat in the command chair of the human exploration cruiser, Aurora, watching the stars scroll past the viewport. Space was quiet here, too quiet. The fleet had been on patrol for weeks, mapping uncharted systems, checking old wormholes, and making sure no threats lingered unnoticed. Ethan liked the quiet most of the time, but something about this stretch of stars felt wrong. Claire Bennett, the communications officer, leaned over her console, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Commander," she said, her voice tense but calm, "we're receiving a signal. It's unusual." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" Claire's eyes widened slightly as she worked. "It's an SOS, not a normal distress call. It's advanced. Definitely not human and definitely not from anywhere we've recorded before. The technology is sophisticated, almost impossible to decode fully, but it's asking for help." Ethan frowned and leaned forward. "Can we tell where it's coming from?" Claire adjusted the sensors and pointed at a blinking dot on the star map. "Yes, it's from a system near the edge of the Varkan sector. There's a planet there, one that hasn't been cataloged before. Whoever sent this signal is in trouble." Ethan tapped his fingers on the arm of his chair. "Varkan sector, that's far from any known trade routes or colonies. If they're sending an SOS, they must be in real danger. Prepare a full analysis. I want to know everything we can about this planet and the species before we make any decisions." Leo Harris, the pilot, leaned back in his seat, a half-smile on his face. "You always want to know everything first, Ethan. Sometimes I think you'll spend a month analyzing a signal before you even consider jumping." Ethan smiled faintly. "Better a month analyzing than a second acting blindly and getting everyone killed." Claire worked fast. "I'm picking up fragments of information. Whoever this is, they call themselves the Zyler. They are under attack by something aggressive. They didn't identify the attackers clearly, but from the fragments they're violent and deadly. Commander, whatever is happening, they are desperate." Ethan straightened. "Then we don't have the luxury of waiting. Prepare the fleet for a jump. We're going in." Leo let out a low whistle. "Going in? We barely know what we're up against. This could be trouble beyond anything we've seen." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I know. But if we ignore an SOS, that's not who we are. Humanity doesn't turn away from those in need. Not now, not ever." Claire nodded silently, her fingers flying over the console as she transmitted jump coordinates to the rest of the fleet. The Aurora and its escort ships hummed with power, energy flowing through their engines as they prepared to leave the quiet safety of known space. When the fleet emerged near the Zyler system, the sight that greeted them was unlike anything Ethan had expected. The planet below was huge and strange, with swirling green and blue clouds, jagged mountains, and glowing cities scattered across its surface. But the view from orbit was terrifying. Deathworlder ships, massive and black, patrolled aggressively, firing on everything in sight. Some ships were already in flames, their crews lost in seconds. The planet's surface glowed red with fire from orbital strikes. Ethan's stomach sank. "They're already attacking," he muttered. Claire's voice was steady but strained. "Commander, they've detected us. One of their ships is moving toward the fleet. I'm picking up weapons signatures. They're preparing to fire." Leo's hands tightened on the controls. "Looks like they're fast, too. We might not have much time." Ethan took a deep breath. "All right, battle stations. Let's see what they're made of." The human fleet moved quickly, taking defensive positions as the first Deathworlder ship approached. Ethan watched as it came closer. The ship was enormous, far larger than anything humans had built, black as night with jagged edges and spikes. Weapons glowed along its hull, and it moved with eerie precision. Claire tapped a few commands. "They're scanning us. I can't tell if it's a warning or preparation to attack." Ethan's fingers hovered over the console. "We don't wait for warnings. Defensive patterns ready. Fire only if they attack first, but be ready to strike hard." The Deathworlder ship fired first. Bright energy beams tore across space, striking one of the human frigates. Explosions rocked the fleet, and alarms blared. "Shields holding," Leo shouted, twisting the controls to dodge another volley. "They're strong, but not unbeatable." Ethan's mind raced. The SOS had not lied. Whoever had sent it, they were facing an enemy that would not stop, would not show mercy, and had no concern for life. And yet, seeing the chaos and destruction, Ethan felt a surge of determination. Humanity had never faced anything like this, but they had something the Deathworlders did not: planning, ingenuity, and courage. Claire's fingers flew across her console. Commander, I'm picking up more signals. The Zyler, they're trying to fight back. Weak defenses, but they're still fighting, and they're trying to get civilians off the planet. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we join them, prepare to deploy fighters and shuttles. We protect who we can. We stop these attackers if it's the last thing we do. Leo's eyes lit up. Finally, some action. Let's show them why humans don't run from a fight. As the fleet moved closer to the planet, they saw the Zyler ships, strange in design with crystal-like hulls that shimmered in the light of nearby stars. They were being torn apart slowly by the Deathworlders, but still resisting, firing desperately at the attackers. The humans coordinated with what signals they could understand, trying to anticipate enemy movements. Ethan noticed something strange. The Deathworlders did not just attack ships. They targeted every structure, every visible living thing with ruthless efficiency. There was no mercy, no hesitation. Claire's voice was tight. They are different from anything we've fought. They kill for sport or maybe instinct. I can't tell, but their attacks are methodical. Every strike is precise, meant to destroy completely. Ethan swallowed hard. Then we have to be smarter. We can't match them in raw power, but we can outthink them. Coordinate with the Zylers, hit their weak points, and buy time for evacuation. Leo grinned, but there was tension in his grin. Sounds like a plan. Let's go make history, Commander. As they closed in, the first human fighter squadron launched, weaving through beams of energy and debris. Explosions flared across the void as they struck the Deathworlders' smaller vessels. The humans were fast, agile, and precise. They dodged attacks and returned fire with shocking accuracy. The Deathworlders were powerful, but the humans had tactics and teamwork. Ethan watched the battle unfold from the command deck. He saw bravery everywhere, pilots risking everything to protect others, shuttles ferrying civilians to safety, engineers keeping damaged ships running under fire. He felt proud but also worried. Every human loss hit him personally. Every moment of hesitation could mean total destruction. Claire's voice broke into his thoughts. Commander, the SOS signal, I think it's coming from the surface. There are clusters of survivors trying to hold positions. If we don't act fast, they won't make it. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Then we split the fleet. Leo, you lead a strike team to the surface. Provide cover for the evac shuttles. I'll coordinate orbital attacks to hold the enemy off. Leo saluted. Roger that, let's go. The fleet moved with precision. Humans and Zylers, strangers yet allies, fought side by side against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. For the first time, Ethan saw the human advantage clearly. Courage, intelligence, and an unyielding refusal to give up. They might be outgunned, outnumbered, and facing a creature with no mercy, but they would not leave the Zyler to die alone. The battle raged. Explosions shook space. Fires lit up the planet below. Shuttles weaved through debris fields, carrying the terrified Zylers to safety. Humans fought not for glory, but because it was right, because they could not ignore a call for help, no matter the cost. Ethan leaned forward, watching as Leo's fighters tore through a squadron of Deathworlder vessels. Keep going, he muttered. Keep fighting. We're not leaving them behind, not now, not ever. Claire tapped his shoulder gently. Commander, there's more of them coming, bigger ships, they're regrouping. I don't think the SOS prepared us for this. Ethan's jaw tightened and a hard edge came into his voice. Then we fight harder. We protect who we can. That's all we can do. And if we survive, the galaxy will know what humans are capable of. And with that, the human fleet plunged deeper into the chaos, racing against time to reach the SOS signal, to protect the Zyler, and to stand against an enemy that had never faced mercy, and never would. The human fleet had barely settled into position around the Zyler system when the next wave of Deathworlder ships appeared. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, their black hulls cutting through space like predators closing in on prey. Ethan Moore tightened his grip on the command console. This was no ordinary enemy. The Deathworlders were methodical, relentless, and utterly ruthless. Commander, Claire Bennett said, her voice tight, they're coordinating attacks. It's like they know exactly where we'll be before we get there. They're not just attacking, they're predicting our movements. Ethan leaned forward. We have to stay unpredictable. Leo, keep your squadron moving in patterns they can't follow. Split the fleet, lure them into traps if you can. Claire, feed me their positions as fast as you can. Leo Harris saluted sharply and bolted from his chair, heading to the fighter bay. His team of 10 pilots scrambled into their ships, engines flaring as they launched into the void. Time to give them a little chaos. Leo muttered, a grin on his face, though his eyes betrayed his tension. From orbit, the Deathworlders unleashed a barrage that lit up the space around the planet. One of the smaller human frigates was hit directly, and a shockwave of fire sent fragments spinning across the void. Alarms blared in the Aurora, and Ethan flinched as he watched the vessel disintegrate. "Damage report," he barked. "Frigate Voss is lost," Claire replied quickly, "but our shields absorbed the brunt of the attack. The fleet is still operational, Commander." Fighters are holding their positions. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Keep it that way. We can't afford more losses. Focus on the survivors below and the evacuation routes. Protect them at all costs." Leo's squadron swooped around the Deathworlder ships, diving into their lines and firing precise bursts. The Deathworlders responded with beams that tore through space, vaporizing one human fighter after another. Leo twisted his controls, narrowly avoiding a blast that disintegrated his wingman. His heart pounded, and for the first time, fear gripped him fully. But he pushed it down. Fear was a tool, not a master. On the planet's surface, the Zylers were barely holding their ground. Their cities, glowing with strange energy, were under constant bombardment. Claire tapped into the SOS signal, trying to trace groups of survivors moving toward evacuation points. "Commander," she said, "there are small clusters holding out. They're trying to get civilians to the shuttle zones, but the Deathworlders are cutting off their paths." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Then we open the corridors. Fighters and shuttles create a safe path. Leo, take your team down and provide cover. I'll coordinate orbital strikes to slow the Deathworlders' reinforcements." Leo's eyes widened. "Going to the surface? That's insane." "Insane or necessary," Ethan said. "The Zylers won't survive without us, and we're not leaving them to die." The human fleet split. Some ships stayed in orbit to draw fire and provide cover. Others, including Leo's fighters, dove toward the planet, weaving through fiery debris and dodging energy blasts. Ethan directed orbital attacks with precision, focusing on the enemy supply lines and smaller ships that threatened to overwhelm the Zyler forces. Claire worked faster than ever, coordinating with the Zylers through improvised translations. "They understand basic commands," she said. "If we guide them carefully, we can evacuate most of the civilians, but time is running out." The first wave of shuttles launched from the surface, carrying terrified Zylers. Ethan's heart ached as he watched families huddled together, holding glowing children in their arms, eyes wide with fear. Humanity had faced dangers before, but seeing innocence in the crossfire made the battle feel personal. Leo's squadron tore into the Deathworlder forces, weaving through their massive ships with daring maneuvers. One fighter was hit, spinning uncontrollably, and Leo dove to rescue the pilot. He caught him just before the fighter disintegrated and pulled him into the nearest shuttle. "Hang on!" he shouted, his hands steady on the controls. The Deathworlders adapted quickly. Their massive flagship entered orbit, a black mountain against the planet's glow. Energy beams fired from its hull, cutting down fleeing ships and shuttles alike. Ethan felt a wave of dread. This ship was enormous, far more powerful than anything humanity had faced before. "Commander," Claire said, her voice shaking slightly, "their flagship is preparing for a planetary strike. If it fires, the Zylers on the ground will be annihilated." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Then we stop it. All units focus on the flagship. Leo, you lead the strike. I'll coordinate orbital attacks to weaken it. Claire, give me everything you've got on its weak points." Leo nodded, determination replacing his fear. "Understood, let's do this." The fighters dove toward the flagship, dodging energy blasts that could have vaporized them instantly. Leo maneuvered with skill, narrowly avoiding a massive beam that tore through space where another fighter had been. Explosions lit up the void, sending fragments of enemy ships spinning. The human pilots moved with precision, striking at weak points in the flagship's armor. On the Aurora, Ethan directed orbital cannons, targeting the flagship's engines. "Keep hitting the power cores," he shouted. "We have to slow it down." Claire's hands flew over the console. "I've intercepted some of their internal signals. They're adjusting shields. Commander, it won't hold much longer if we hit the engines and hull simultaneously." Ethan nodded. "Then that's exactly what we do. Full fire on engines and hull. Focus, everyone." The flagship shuddered under the coordinated assault. Fires erupted along its hull, and smaller vessels scrambled to compensate for the damage. Leo's squadron pressed forward, weaving through the chaos and striking with pinpoint accuracy. On the planet, the Zylers cheered quietly as the flagship wobbled in orbit. Evacuation routes began to open, and more civilians were able to board shuttles safely. Ethan felt a surge of hope. Humanity was holding the line, they were making a difference. But the Deathworlders were not finished. Reinforcements poured in from beyond the system, massive ships dropping from the void like falling stars. Ethan's jaw tightened. The battle was far from over and losses were mounting. One of the human frigates took a direct hit, spinning out of control and exploding in a blinding flash. Leo dodged another energy beam, narrowly saving his own fighter. "Commander," he shouted, "they're too many." "We can't hold them all." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "Then we focus on priorities, protect the civilians and the Zyler defenders, draw their attention to us if you have to. We can't let the planet fall while we fight them off." Claire's voice broke through the chaos. "I've found a pattern in their attacks. If we move in zigzag formations, we can reduce casualties. I can coordinate the fleet to make them waste firepower on empty space." Ethan smiled faintly. "Good work. Execute it immediately. Every life saved matters." The fleet shifted formations. Human fighters weaved and darted unpredictably, drawing enemy fire away from shuttles and vulnerable Zylers. Orbital bombardments targeted enemy ships that had grown careless, their massive beams missing the agile humans by fractions of a second. Leo led the charge, striking deep into enemy lines. One by one, he disabled smaller vessels, giving the fleeing shuttles room to maneuver. Explosions rocked the space around him, but he remained focused. He had lost friends, but he would not lose more if he could help it. Ethan coordinated from above, adjusting attacks and defenses in real time. The human fleet was not as powerful as the Deathworlders, but their strategy, teamwork, and adaptability gave them an edge. Slowly, the balance began to shift. Despite the chaos, moments of heroism shone through. Claire guided a shuttle filled with children through a field of debris, using the fleet's cover to avoid destruction. Leo rescued a Zyler pilot trapped in a burning fighter. Ethan redirected orbital strikes just in time to prevent another civilian convoy from being hit. Hours passed, but the battle showed no sign of ending. Deathworlders were relentless, but the humans refused to give in. Their courage, planning, and moral determination kept hope alive. Each victory, each life saved, reminded Ethan why humanity had to fight. Not for conquest, not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. And as the Deathworlder flagship reeled from damage and the fleet adapted to new waves of attackers, Ethan knew one thing for certain. This fight had only begun. Humanity would strike back with everything it had, not just to survive, but to show that no matter the enemy, humans would not turn from mercy, courage, or justice. The battle had been raging for hours, yet the human fleet showed no signs of stopping. Ethan Moore sat in the command chair of the Aurora, sweat running down his face. He had lost count of how many ships had been destroyed, how many Zylers had died, but he refused to let the despair take hold. There was a way to win this fight, and he was determined to find it. Claire Bennett was at her console, eyes scanning streams of signals. "Commander," she said, pointing at her screen, "I've intercepted more Deathworlder communications. They're moving their main forces toward the planet. Their flagship is still damaged, but it's heading straight for the largest Zyler city. If it lands a direct strike, thousands will die instantly." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we have to stop it. Leo, gather your best pilots and prepare for a strike on the flagship. I'll coordinate orbital attacks to weaken it further. Claire, feed us every weak point you can find. We're going to take them down." Leo Harris saluted sharply, though the tension was clear in his eyes. "Understood, Commander. We'll give them a fight they won't forget." The human pilots launched from orbit, diving toward the massive flagship. Its black hull glimmered against the planet's glow, and Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. The Deathworlders were powerful, but humans had something their enemy could never match: courage and ingenuity. On the planet, the Zylers were still holding their ground, though barely. Civilians ran toward evacuation points, guided by human shuttles and fire teams. Energy blasts tore through the streets, reducing buildings to rubble, yet the survivors pressed on, inspired by the humans' willingness to risk everything for them. Leo led his squadron with precision, weaving through the enemy fire. He targeted smaller ships first, knowing that if they could reduce the fleet's numbers, the flagship would be more vulnerable. One of the Deathworlder vessels fired a beam that struck a human fighter directly. The explosion sent fragments spinning in all directions. Leo twisted his controls to avoid the debris and dove toward the flagship, determined to finish what they had started. Ethan directed orbital strikes from the Aurora, aiming for the flagship's engines. "Keep hitting the engines, slow it down," he shouted. "We need to buy time for the surface evacuation." Claire's fingers flew across her console. "I've found a pattern in their shield systems. There's a momentary drop every 60 seconds. If we time our attacks, we can hit the engines while the shields are down." "That could cripple the flagship," Ethan nodded. "Good work. Time it perfectly, Leo. Focus your strike when the shields falter. Everyone else cover him." Leo's squadron adjusted their positions. They circled the massive flagship, waiting for the critical moment. Energy beams swept past them, tearing through the void, but the pilots held steady. When the shield dropped, even for a fraction of a second, Leo's team fired with everything they had. Blasts struck the engines, causing a chain reaction of sparks and smoke along the hull. The flagship shuddered violently. Ethan allowed himself a brief smile. "Yes, keep it up." On the planet, Zylers cheered quietly as the flagship's movement faltered. Civilians rushed toward the evacuation zones, guided by human and Zyler teams working together. The humans' coordination and bravery inspired the aliens in a way that words could not express. But the Deathworlders were far from defeated. Reinforcements arrived from the far side of the system. More black ships appeared, massive and threatening. Ethan's stomach tightened. The battle was far from over and casualties were mounting. One of the human frigates took a direct hit, spiraling out of control and exploding in a blinding flash. Leo dodged another energy beam, narrowly saving his own fighter. "Commander," he shouted, "they're too many." "We can't hold them all." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "Then we focus on priorities, protect the civilians and the Zyler defenders, draw their attention to us if you have to. We can't let the planet fall while we fight them off." Claire's voice broke through the chaos. "I've found another weakness. The flagship has a central command hub on the dorsal side. If we can hit it, we might disable their entire fleet coordination temporarily." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "That's our chance. Leo, lead a strike on that hub. Timing is everything." "The rest of the fleet provides cover. We may not get a second chance." Leo nodded grimly. "Understood, Commander. Let's finish this." The squadron dove toward the flagship, weaving through its defensive fire. Energy beams ripped past them, but the pilots stayed focused. Leo fired precise shots at the command hub. Explosions erupted along the dorsal surface of the flagship, and alarms blared across the Deathworlder fleet. The enemy ships faltered, their coordination disrupted. The humans pressed the attack. Orbital strikes targeted their reinforcements, and fighter squads swooped in to disable remaining vessels. Slowly, the tide began to turn. On the planet, evacuation operations accelerated. Civilians were guided into shuttles, and small Zyler defensive teams held off the remaining attackers. Ethan coordinated with Claire to time each strike perfectly, keeping the enemy off balance and allowing the rescue to continue. Leo's squadron made repeated passes, striking at weak points and dodging lethal attacks. One of the fighters was hit and spun uncontrollably toward the planet, but Leo dove to intercept it, pulling the pilot to safety. He felt fear, but he pushed it down. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was the will to act despite it. The flagship shuddered under constant fire. Sparks flew from its engines, and massive cracks appeared along its hull. The Deathworlder fleet's coordination collapsed entirely, leaving the remaining ships vulnerable. Ethan smiled grimly. Humanity was turning the tide, but the battle had a cost. Several human pilots had been lost, and many ships were damaged. Ethan gritted his teeth, knowing there would be no time to mourn. The final strike was still ahead. Claire's voice broke into his thoughts. "Commander, the flagship is weakening, but they are preparing one last attack. A massive energy beam aimed at the planet. If it hits, thousands of Zylers will die instantly." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we hit it now, full firepower on the flagship, no holding back, protect the planet at all costs." The fleet focused everything on the flagship. Fighter squads swarmed it from every direction, orbital cannons fired relentlessly, and Claire coordinated strike patterns to exploit every weak point. The flagship shuddered violently, sparks flying from every damaged system. Leo led the final strike, diving through the enemy fire to hit the critical systems. Explosions erupted across the flagship, and its massive energy beam faltered. Sparks and fire cascaded along its hull, and finally, with a deafening roar, the flagship exploded. The remaining Deathworlder ships, leaderless and disorganized, scattered into the void. Many were destroyed by the human and Zyler forces. The battle was over. Silence returned to the system, broken only by the distant cries of survivors. Ethan exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the victory and the cost. Claire leaned against the console, exhausted but relieved. "We did it," she said softly. "The Zylers, they're safe for now." Leo's voice came over the comm, shaky but proud. "We actually did it." "I can't believe it. They didn't see us coming and we saved them." Ethan nodded, his eyes on the planet below. Fires still burned, but survivors were safe, guided by human and Zyler teams. He knew the Deathworlders would return someday, but humanity had proven something important. Courage, intelligence, and compassion could defeat even the most merciless enemy. On the planet, Zyler civilians gathered to thank the humans. Their voices were quiet, but the gratitude was clear. They had been saved by strangers, by a species that risked everything without hesitation. Humanity had earned their trust and their respect. Ethan allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had faced an enemy that showed no mercy, yet humans had struck back with strategy, bravery, and heart. They had turned the tide not just through force, but through courage and ingenuity. Claire looked at him and smiled tiredly. "Commander, they'll tell stories about this. About how humans arrived and fought when no one else would." Ethan nodded. "Good, they should know, but let's not forget the cost. We lost friends today. We honor them by making sure their sacrifice wasn't in vain." Leo leaned against the wall of the fighter bay, looking out at the stars. "You know, Commander, I think humanity is starting to get noticed. They'll remember us for more than just this system." Ethan gave a small smile. "They will. But for now, we rebuild, we help the Zyler, and we prepare. There's always another challenge waiting in the stars, and humanity will face it together." As the fleet gathered around the planet, providing aid and organizing evacuation, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had proven it could fight without mercy when needed, but also show compassion and courage. The galaxy had taken notice, and humans had a new reputation: fierce, clever, and merciful when it mattered most. And as the sun rose over the Zyler world, burning orange and green across the horizon, Ethan Moore allowed himself a rare moment of peace. They had won this battle, saved countless lives, and shown that humanity was not just survivors. They were heroes. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was not peaceful. The Zyler system was scarred by the war. Burned ships drifted through space, and the planet's surface was littered with the ruins of buildings and broken streets. Ethan Moore stood on the bridge of the Aurora, looking down at the world below. It had been a hard fight, but they had won. The Deathworlders had been driven off, at least for now. Claire Bennett was beside him, her eyes still scanning the console. "Commander," she said softly, "we've accounted for most of the survivors. The Zylers are gathering in the safe zones." Many civilians were rescued by human shuttles. It could have been much worse. Ethan nodded, though the weight of the losses pressed on him. It was close, too close, but humanity did what it had to do. "We saved lives, and we showed that we would not stand by while others suffered." Leo Harris entered the bridge, still carrying the fatigue of battle on his face. "It's quiet now, almost too quiet. We lost some good pilots today, but we did what we had to. We saved the Zylers." Ethan turned to him. "Exactly, and that's why we fight. Not for glory, not for power, but for what is right. The cost is always high, but it's worth it if lives are saved." Claire leaned closer to her console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Commander, I've been tracking the Deathworlder retreat. They're falling back in disarray. Their fleet coordination is broken. They won't be able to strike this system again for a long time, if ever. Humans have proven a point today." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "Good. But we can't get comfortable. They are merciless. They will come back eventually. We have to be ready for the next time." Leo shook his head. "You know, I never thought humans would be capable of this kind of fight. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and yet we made a difference. We actually turned the tide." Ethan looked at the planet below. Fires still burned, but the Zylers were alive, moving toward safety under human guidance. "It's not just about fighting, Leo. It's about courage, intelligence, and the will to act when it matters. Humanity has those in plenty. That's why we survived, and that's why we won." Claire pointed at a cluster of signals on her screen. "Commander, some Zylers want to communicate with us directly. They want to thank the humans who saved them." They want to know more about our species, about what we can do together. Ethan smiled faintly. Then we tell them, we are humans. We fight, yes, but we also help. We don't turn away from those who need us. That is who we are. Leo stepped closer, a faint grin forming on his face. Commander, do you think this changes how other species see humans? They must know now that we won't hesitate to act when it matters. Ethan nodded. They will know. Humans are no longer strangers in the galaxy. We are a force to be reckoned with, yes, but also a species that can inspire hope. That is the message we send. We strike when we must, but we protect when we can. On the surface, human and Zyler teams worked together to stabilize the cities. Shuttles carried the injured to orbiting medical ships. Fires were extinguished, and makeshift shelters were set up for those who had lost homes. Humanity's presence had brought order where chaos had reigned, showing the Zylers that they were not alone. Ethan walked through the corridors of the Aurora, observing his crew. Engineers repaired damaged systems, medics tended to the wounded, and pilots cleaned their equipment and prepared for the next mission. He felt pride in them. Every human on that ship had risked their life, faced fear, and acted with courage. They were the reason the Zylers survived. Claire joined him as he paused near the observation window, staring at the stars beyond. "Do you think the Zyler will ever forget this, Commander?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head. "They won't. Humans don't just fight with weapons, we fight with heart. We fight with our minds. That is something that cannot be erased. They will remember us as saviors, as allies, and as a species capable of great courage." Leo appeared beside them, leaning against the railing. "Commander, do you think this will change how we see ourselves? Humans have always been explorers, but today we were fighters, too. Protectors, maybe this is what we're meant to be in the galaxy." Ethan considered the question carefully. "Perhaps, but it's not about destiny, it's about choice. We choose to act. We choose to stand when others fall. That is what makes us human. That is what makes us strong." The Zylers gathered in the central safe zone, where human medics and engineers worked side by side with Zyler teams. Their leader, a tall alien named Lornik, approached Ethan with a calm dignity. His crystalline skin shimmered in the light, and his eyes held deep gratitude. "Human Commander," Lornik said, his voice melodic and firm, "your species arrived when we had no hope. You fought when others would have fled. You saved our people. Words are not enough to express our gratitude." Ethan bowed slightly. "We did what any human would do, Lornik. We don't leave those in need to suffer. We acted because it was right." Lornik's eyes softened. "Then humanity has a reputation now in this sector. Your courage and compassion will be remembered. You are not only survivors, but heroes." Claire smiled quietly. "And perhaps friends, the Zyler will remember us, and maybe the galaxy will too." Ethan turned back to the fleet outside orbit. The human ships were being repaired, systems checked, and pilots rested. Despite the cost, they had survived. Despite the enemy's power, they had triumphed. Humanity had shown that strategy, courage, and moral strength could face any enemy, even those who seemed unstoppable. Leo looked out at the horizon, where the destroyed Deathworlder ships drifted in the void. "You know, Commander, I think they'll think twice before coming back. Humans aren't just clever, we're relentless when it matters." Ethan smiled. "Yes, but we must remain vigilant. There are always more challenges in the galaxy. This was just one battle. The true test is how we act in every challenge that comes after." On the planet, human engineers helped the Zylers rebuild critical systems. Shuttles flew back and forth between the surface and orbit, carrying supplies, medics, and engineers. Every life saved reinforced Ethan's belief that humanity had a responsibility beyond its own species, a duty to act with courage, intelligence, and heart wherever they could. Claire tapped her console, analyzing remaining signals from the battlefield. "Commander, we've accounted for the majority of the Deathworlder fleet. Their command structures are broken. They'll retreat for now, but they may return. We should report this to the Galactic Council and prepare defenses." Ethan nodded. "Yes. But for today, we celebrate a victory, not for glory, but for the lives saved. Humanity has made a mark here, and the Zyler know that we are allies, not conquerors." Leo smirked faintly. "And maybe, just maybe, we've started a reputation no one will forget. Humans don't strike without purpose, but when we do, we make it count." Ethan looked at the stars, letting the moment settle in. The fleet had survived, the Zylers had been saved, and humanity had proven its worth beyond doubt. But he knew the galaxy was vast, full of threats and challenges far greater than anything they had faced so far. The human race would need courage, ingenuity, and heart in every step ahead. And as the sun rose over the Zyler world, painting the sky with shades of green and orange, Ethan Moore allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The battle was won. Humanity had struck without mercy when necessary, but it had also shown compassion and courage. The galaxy had taken notice, and humans had earned a reputation that would not soon be forgotten. Every life saved, every strategy executed, every brave act in the face of death had proven something vital. Humanity was not just capable of surviving in the stars, it was capable of inspiring hope, showing strength, and facing any enemy with heart and mind together. Ethan watched as shuttles carried civilians to safety and as Zyler and human teams worked side by side. He knew this was just one of many battles to come, but for now, humanity had shown what it could do. They had acted with skill, courage, and compassion, and the galaxy had seen it. "Commander," Claire said softly, "the Zylers want to know if we will stay, if humans will continue to help." Ethan shook his head slightly. "We will. Not because we are invincible, but because we are human, and humans do not abandon those in need. That is a promise." Leo grinned. "Then maybe we've done more than win a battle. Maybe we've started something bigger, a reason for other species to believe in us, to trust us." Ethan looked out at the stars, the fleet preparing for its next mission. "Yes," he said, "and humanity will keep showing the galaxy what it means to fight with courage and heart. This is only the beginning." The Zyler people cheered quietly, looking at the humans with gratitude and awe. Lives had been saved, cities had been defended, and hope had been restored. The galaxy had learned a simple truth: humans were not to be underestimated. Fierce, clever, and compassionate, they would act when others could not, and they would strike back against those who showed no mercy. And in that quiet moment, as the Aurora and its fleet orbited the recovering world, Ethan Moore knew that humanity had earned its place among the stars, not just as survivors, but as heroes, protectors, and a force the galaxy would remember.